Thursday, October 5th, 2017. This is the Hermetic Hour. I'm your host, Poke Runyon, and tonight we air a discussion on the evolution of the solar hero in mythology, from the Sumerian Gilgamesh, who was the model for the Phoenician Melkart, who in turn inspired the Greek Hercules. Gilgamesh is a 4,000-year-old epic adventure story which circulated throughout the whole Middle East, with copies found among the Hittites and the Canaanites. And even as Ishtar and Tammuz were translated into Astarte and Baal and subsequently became Aphrodite and Adonis, Gilgamesh, like Hercules, slays a lion, a bull, a giant, and a many-headed monster. His victories and Hercules' labors are seen as representing the sun's yearly progress through the signs of the zodiac. So, tune in and we'll go back to the days of myth and legend and make our way through the circle of the beasts, as the zodiac was originally called. Now, the solar hero myth cycle is probably one of the most important mythical allegories in our esoteric tradition. The solar hero and his exploits through the signs of the zodiac represent the journey of the human soul through its continuing incarnations. The signs of the zodiac, especially those represented by animals, provide a key to interpreting this very ancient system of personal human history, both past and future. The 12 signs of the zodiac are like the 12 hours of a vast clock in the heavens, a time machine that gives us a window to view our destiny. This very ancient form of natal astrology was originally intended for kings alone, and kings in those ancient times were all thought to be related to gods. But by the 1st century of the Common Era, Hermes Trismegistus and Jesus the Nazarene revealed that all men and women are divinely ensouled. And so, this ancient solar hero mystery could be applied to those gifted with the mind, according to Hermes, or as Jesus put it, in my Father's house there are many mansions. And Jesus was also something of an elitist, although he didn't openly say that. But he was something of an elitist because he told, regarding these kind of mysteries, he told his disciples, "Don't cast your pearls before swine." One of the keys to unlock this mystery are the 4 cherubs that are so familiar to the Western tradition: the lion, Leo; the bull, Taurus; the man, Aquarius; and the eagle, representing Scorpio. They represent the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac, and they form a perfect equivalent cross if you place them on the zodiacal wheel. And we hold that the zodiac, as we know it, began with Taurus the bull at vernal equinox 22,000 years ago, long before the Great Flood. Our astrology and mythology, both pagan, Hellenic, and biblical, dates from the Second Taurian Age, which began around 4000 BC, and continued until 1800 BC, and lingered on in tradition until 332 BC, when Alexander the Great, full of Melkart. Melkart, of course, was the Phoenician Hercules, at Phoenician Tyre, and formally ushered in the age of Aries. This is why Ptolemy, who defined our astrology, started at 0 degrees Aries. So, the earliest written account of the solar hero is Gilgamesh, which was originally set forth in 5 separate stories back in ancient Sumer. Now, the subsequent Babylonian civilization combined these 5 tales into one epic adventure story, which we will summarize in a short synopsis. The epic's prelude offers a general introduction to Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, who was 2/3 god and 1/3 man. He built magnificent ziggurats or temple towers, surrounded his city with high walls, and laid out its orchards and fields. He was physically beautiful, immensely strong, and very wise. Although Gilgamesh was godlike in body and mind, he began his kingship as a cruel despot. He lorded over his subjects, raping any woman who struck his fancy, whether she was the wife of one of his warriors or not, or the daughter of a nobleman. He accomplished his building projects with forced labor, and his exhausted subjects groaned under his oppression. The gods heard his subjects' pleas and decided to keep Gilgamesh in check by creating a wild man named Enkidu, who was as magnificent as Gilgamesh. Enkidu became Gilgamesh's great friend, and Gilgamesh's heart was shattered when Enkidu died of an illness inflicted by the gods. Gilgamesh then traveled to the edge of the world and learned about the days before the deluge and other secrets of the gods. And he recorded them on stone tablets. Now the epic begins with Enkidu. He lives with the animals, suckling at their breasts, grazing in their meadows, and drinking at their watering holes. A hunter discovers him and sends a temple prostitute into the wilderness to tame him. At that time, people considered women and sex calming forces that could domesticate wild men like Enkidu and bring them into the civilized world. And when Enkidu sleeps with a woman, the animals reject him since he is no longer one of them. Now he's part of the human world. And then the harlot teaches him everything he needs to know to be a man. Enkidu is outraged by what he hears about Gilgamesh's successes, and so he travels to Uruk to challenge him. And when he arrives, Gilgamesh is about to force his way into a bride's wedding chamber. Enkidu steps into the doorway, blocks his passage. The two men wrestle fiercely for a long time, and Gilgamesh finally prevails. And after that, they become friends and set about looking for an adventure to share. Now, Gilgamesh and Enkidu decide to steal trees from a distant cedar forest forbidden to mortals. A terrifying demon named Humbaba, the devoted servant of Enlil, the god of the earth, wind and air, guards it. The two heroes make the perilous journey to the forest, and standing side by side, they fight with the monster, with the assistance from Shamash, the sun god. The two heroes make a perilous journey in the forest, and they cut down the forbidden trees, fashion the tallest into an enormous gate, make the rest into a raft, and float it back to Uruk. And upon their return, Ishtar, the goddess of love, is overcome with lust for Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh spurns her, as she's enraged, and the goddess asks her father, Anu, the god of the sky, to send the bull of heaven to punish them. The bull comes down from the sky, bringing with him 7 years of famine. Gilgamesh and Enkidu wrestle with the bull, and they kill it. And, this is a prelude to Mithra, of course. The gods meet in council and agree that one of the two friends must be punished for their transgression. And they decide Enkidu is going to die. And he takes ill, and he suffers immensely, and shares his visions of the underworld with Gilgamesh. When he finally dies, Gilgamesh is heartbroken. Gilgamesh can't stop grieving for Enkidu, and he can't stop brooding about the prospect of his own death. And exchanging his kingly garments for animal skins as a way of mourning Enkidu, he sets off into the wilderness, determined to find Utnapishtim, the Mesopotamian Noah. After the flood, the gods had granted Utnapishtim eternal life. And Gilgamesh hopes that Utnapishtim can tell him how he might avoid death also. And Gilgamesh's journey takes him to the twin-peaked mountain called Mashu, where the sun sets into one side of the mountain at night and rises out the other side of the mountain in the morning. And we might mention that in those days the underworld was the overworld, because all of the sun, all the stars and planets, they set, and they went underground from there, looking at the horizon. They went down into the underground. Utnapishtim lives beyond the mountain, but the two scorpion monsters that guard the entrance refuse to allow Gilgamesh into the tunnel that passes through it. Gilgamesh pleads with them, and they relent. After a harrowing passage through the darkness, Gilgamesh emerges into a beautiful garden by the sea, and there he meets Saduri, a veiled tavern keeper, and tells her about his quest. And she warns him that seeking immortality is futile and that he should be satisfied with the pleasures of this world. However, when she can't turn him away from his purpose, she directs Ur-Shanabi, the ferryman. Now, this sounds like the Charon and the River Styx and in the Greek underworld. Well, you better believe it was the Greek myths and owed a lot to Gilgamesh. Not just Hercules, but a number of the Greek myths. Ur-Shanabi, the ferryman, takes Gilgamesh on a boat journey across the sea and through the waters of death to Utnapishtim, and Utnapishtim tells Gilgamesh the story of the flood. Now the gods met in council and decided to destroy humankind. Ea, the god of wisdom, warned Utnapishtim about the god's plans and told him how to fashion a gigantic boat in which his family and the seed of every living creature might escape. And by the way, this original ark was in the form of a cube, and it eventually became a constellation. When the waters finally receded, the gods regretted what they had done and agreed that they would never try to destroy humankind again. Utnapishtim was rewarded with eternal life. Men would die, but humankind would continue. When Gilgamesh insists that he be allowed to live forever, Utnapishtim gives him a test. If you think you can stay alive for eternity, he says, surely you can stay awake for a week. And Gilgamesh tries but immediately fails, and so Utnapishtim orders him to clean himself and put on his royal garments again and return to Uruk, where he belongs. Just as Gilgamesh is departing, however, Utnapishtim's wife convinces him to tell Gilgamesh about a miraculous plant that restores youth. Gilgamesh finds the plant, has to do a little pearl diving to find it, and takes it with him, planning to share it with the elders of Uruk. But a snake steals the plant one night while they are camping, while he's bathing in fresh water. And as the serpent slithers away, it sheds its skin and becomes young again. When Gilgamesh returns to Uruk, he is empty-handed but reconciled at last to his mortality. He knows that he can't live forever, but that humankind will. Now he sees that the city he had repudiated in his grief and terror is magnificent, enduring the achievement, the closest thing to immortality to which a mortal can aspire. And actually, we should add that when he died, he became like Osiris. He became the Lord of the Dead. Michael, let's discuss this a little bit. Some of the aspects of this that relate to that relate to the labors of Hercules or essentially to Melkart. In one of the symbolic breakdown that I read by John David Ebert, and I have a abbreviated version of that I can read, and we'll give John David Ebert credit for it. He was, by the way, Ebert was the editor of for the Joseph Campbell Foundation, and he has a magazine called Mythic Passages, a magazine of imagination, which is also on the internet, and I highly recommend it. Anyway, he said, in breaking this whole thing down, that Gilgamesh and Enkidu represented the constellation Gemini. Are you familiar with that?
I am a little bit. I did read that article myself in preparation, but so that is a theory I'm familiar with.
Yeah, well, one of the things about that we should mention is that Gilgamesh's mother, Ninsun, who was a minor goddess, his mother really liked Enkidu and thought he would be a good influence on Gilgamesh, and so she adopted him. She formally adopted him as her son, which made him essentially Gilgamesh's brother. And in doing this, of course would certainly be the justification for considering Gilgamesh and Enkidu to be related to the son of Gemini. Now, consequently, if we're going to start tracing this, Gilgamesh through the zodiac, when she finally, I think that the time when she finally adopts him in the story, if we're going to plot the story out, at the time when Ninsen decides to officially adopt Enkidu would indicate that Gilgamesh is in the sign of Gemini. I think that'd be reasonable, and then we can continue on. What do you think?
I would agree. I completely agree with that. It also fits when she's the one who prophesied that Gilgamesh would love Enkidu as a wife.
Yeah. I've got, as I said, I kind of abbreviated John Ebert's article here, so it wouldn't, cutting out some of the the more, I won't say more technical. Let's just say, it can be abbreviated. I could read some of it, but actually, seeing as how you're on, we could just sort of discuss the points. What do you think Humbaba represents? What the monster that guards the forest?
So I kind of lean towards Maria Mateus's take on Humbaba. She linked Humbaba to a vegetation god that is also a god of snakes, which is really interesting, and a storm god. And in Humbaba, Gilgamesh and Enkidu are killing the fertility, which is part of why Gilgamesh doesn't have a child. And it's very similar to our seasonal ceremonies whenever Mot kills Baal.
Yeah, that makes pretty good sense. I think also, and I'm fascinated with the idea too that the cedar forest, that cedar forest, of course, we know it's in Lebanon, and we know it has a lot to do with Canaanite mythology, and apparently that cedar forest in those days was much more extensive. And apparently, it apparently covered a lot of Syria and also into the upper reaches of the Tigris and Euphrates. In a way, it kind of reminds me of the European forest, what we call the forest of fear. As you remember, in Europe, that oak forest in Europe, which is primarily an oak forest, it went all the way from Poland, all the way across the Channel through England and all the way into Ireland originally. And and today there's hardly anything left of it. And the reason being that the British Navy needed all those trees for one thing. They needed all those oak trees for their wooden ships and iron men, And so that original oak forest in Europe was all cut down for wooden and house lumber. And the same thing I think probably applies to the cedar forest, that big cedar forest that went all the way from Lebanon to literally from Lebanon all the way to Haran, probably extended. And I could see why Humbaba was the guardian of the forest, because that cedar was very valuable. They didn't have any timber down in Babylon. They had they made all their bricks. They got straw. They had straw to reinforce the bricks, but they didn't have any timber. So that was a valuable commodity, and Humbaba was the guardian, and that's what they originally, what Gilgamesh went up there to do was to take over the forest and go into the lumbering business, which they did. What I'd like to do, and I haven't done it yet, I did get a circle of the zodiac and put the fixed signs, the cross of the fixed signs across. What I'd like to do is to take the Gilgamesh legend and go right through it and diagram it right on the circle of the zodiac so we could compare each sign. And as I said, John Ebert has done this in this article. He hasn't diagrammed, he doesn't actually diagram it, but what he's done is he's gone through this article and he's pretty much, pegged sign for sign. Let's see, Gilgamesh's solar journey through the 12 signs of the sun's annual passage through the year. We are moving toward the ecliptic from Taurus to Gemini to Cancer to Leo. Remember, though, that this was with regard to the precession of the equinoxes. The progression moves back the other way. In effect, from the age of Gemini to Taurus, and from the age of Taurus, 4,000 BC, to the age of Aries, known to the Mesopotamians, however, as the day laborer. Now, this is one thing that Ebert says. He says he couldn't find Aries in the Gilgamesh story, which is understandable because they were very much in the age of Taurus when they did this thing. Consequently, they wouldn't be concerned so much in getting into Aries.
So I'll go ahead and jump in real quick, and as you Ebert, I'll work with Maria Mateus some. Her argument is that you find Aries in Enkidu being domesticated and entering the city because the day laborer was representative of the shepherds and all the hired help that would come into the city from the outside. So Enkidu coming into existence is Aries.
Well, that works, yeah. In the Garden of Jewels, precious stones, at the point along the ecliptic between Scorpio and Sagittarius, there's an opening to the Milky Way. And so it's possible that this tunnel leads them down to the celestial underworld, where Gilgamesh will find this very river that will take him to the domain of Utnapishtim, where here he leaves behind the constellations of the northern hemisphere, for, as the text says, he took the path of the sun god, meaning that he followed the ecliptic as it led him down into the southern celestial hemisphere. Now, this is a point I want to bring two things up. We know that the ancients believed, and here again, this is another opposition on the zodiacal wheel, that Cancer was the gate of men. That was the gate that you came down when you came back down, or came back up, because and the underworld, eventually became the overworld, and the two were virtually interchangeable. When you came back down or came back up, you went through the gate of Cancer, the gate of men, and then you were. If it was your first time around, you probably were born in Leo. If it was your first time around the wheel, but if you came back up through Cancer, as I said, then you would circle around, and it was the next. If it was your next time, you'd circle around and you'd probably come up through Gemini. The gate of the gods, the god that you went out was all the way around on the other side of the zodiac, and that was Capricorn. And so we, in a way, we have to kind of plot this thing. We have to plot this using the equivalent cross of the fixed signs and the gate of the gods and the gate of men. That's kind of the key to to defining the circle of the beast, so to speak. Now, the Milky Way, was the river of souls, and I think we should explain at this point. We should explain this overworld underworld thing, because I'm sure that there are listeners who, we've discussed it before, but I'm sure there are listeners that don't understand quite what we're talking about here. Yeah, do you remember the planets were way back in Sumerian times? The planets were considered evil. They were bad. Evil ones, sowers of ills, born in the bowels of the hills, and they were called the Maskim. And the reason is that they came up. If you looked at the horizon and you were a stargazing shaman in those days, and you looked at the horizon, you saw these wanderers come up over the horizon, and they didn't like the stars. They moved around where the stars were more or less fixed, and these planets actually shifted around, and this is why they were referred to as the disturbers of heaven. And they came up from the underworld. And this is what they did. The whole idea of the underworld was that the stars, all of the heavens, went down at night. They were down below the horizon in the underworld, and so there was no difference in a lot of ways between the underworld and the overworld. One labor, the last labor of Hercules. Graves says it's the last labor. Other people say that this happens in the 11th labor instead of the 12th. Hercules drags the guard dog of hell, Cerberus. He drags him out into the sunlight, drags him up, and in other words, from that point on, the underworld is the overworld. This concept has caused a lot of confusion in people trying to understand mythology. They aren't aware that of the fact the underworld is the overworld. Do you want to give some thoughts on that?
Well, that's something that you've said before, and we've discussed it a fair amount, but it's something that's really interesting. Can you go into a little bit more detail on it for us? Because I know that with Frater Heracles, we've discussed that, and it fascinates us, but we don't quite understand how that change happened.
Well, I think the influence we get the most in our tradition from the Hellenes. As I say, you just finished that course in Hellenic astrology, and I imagine that there's that in that you ran into a lot of Orphic influence in Hellenic astrology, and the Orphics had a lot of their mythology of the underworld and the overworld was almost interchangeable. They would some of those funerary amulets that they would have seemed to be directed toward the underworld, and then some of them seem to be directed toward the overworld. And the two are almost, as I say, they're almost interchangeable. If you take Robert Graves to try to synthesize the whole thing in a poem that he wrote called Instructions to the Orphic Adept, and you can't, as you read that poem, you can't quite tell whether he wants underworld or overworld interpretation. He's got both. The soul rising up, or going down, whether way you want to put it, says, I am a child of earth and of sky also. And you get all this after-death symbolism in the heavens, and then you find the same symbolism in the underworld. Now, Gilgamesh finds the Babylonian Noah, who did attain immortality, but he has to go into the underworld to do it. Finally, he gets out. At least he gets it out of Noah's wife. He doesn't get it from Noah, but he gets it out of his wife to go somewhere near Dilmun in the Persian Gulf and go pearl diving for this plant. Now, it's been pointed out. I think Ebert pointed it out. Someone pointed out that Gilgamesh dives for this plant, this plant of immortality which grows underwater. He dives for it in exactly the same manner that the pearl divers down in Dilmun, and they still do, by the way. Basically, they use a rock as an anchor, and they just let the rock pull them down. Hopefully they hyperventilate enough before they do this, and they let the rock pull them down, to the bottom, which could be 100 feet or more. And then they grab, they get the oysters, grab the pearls, and bring them up. And of course, they're the same damn thing in the South Pacific exactly, and it's very dangerous. And they a lot of them die or get lung disease and one thing or another. But this is what Gilgamesh does, and he gets the plant, and he brings it up. And then he goes and finds a freshwater spring after he comes up out of the sea. He finds a freshwater spring, puts the plant down, and goes to wash himself off, wash off the salt water. And this snake comes by and grabs his plant and eats it, and then sheds his skin, and off the snake goes. Now, this is kind of like, in a way, Hercules goes for the apples, for the golden apples in Hesperides. And of course, those golden apples are they like the fruit of the tree of life in the Bible. And so much of all this, Gilgamesh and Noah and Hercules, all of this shows up in the Bible. We have a lot of exchange in the Bible. What do you think about the final labor? Do you think Gilgamesh bringing up the plant and losing it? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I do. I think that the water snake, and this is a little bit graphic, but it's fertilizing. So when it takes the plant, it's kind of indicating that the only immortality is through reproduction in that sense, as far as physical immortality. I think it's part of it.
Yeah, that is a good solution to that problem. And also, Gilgamesh, this whole idea of finding something that for immortality, I think the immortality that the Gilgamesh eventually, the sort of immortality that he eventually achieves, is the immortality of undying fame, because he's been remembered for about 6,000 years, and also too, that there's similarity that the Gilgamesh story it doesn't just influence Hercules, it influences Ulysses, the Odyssey. It even influences Beowulf. Gilgamesh sort of sets the template for great adventure stories. It's the original adventure story. And you might almost call it pulp fiction on clay tablets in cuneiform. It's a great adventure story. The labors of Hercules, we're probably going to have to get into that next week. We're spending a lot of time on Gilgamesh, which is good. But one of the things that I have not been able to find, and I know you came up with that article on Melkart, or reference to Melkart. I couldn't get it. I couldn't pull it up. I tried to join their thing, but somehow it didn't work. Did you find out anything on Melkart in that article?
So the basic information I got on Melkart is we don't know a huge amount about Melkart. It seems that all the centers of the cult of Hercules were all in heavy Phoenician trading cities, which is kind of interesting. And another thing about the cult of Melkart and Hercules is Strabo, in his geography, says that the Greeks got their knowledge of the stars from the Phoenicians.
Yeah, well, that's Strabo. Good. Well, at least we got a source there. I've heard, I have read that before several times. Although, I don't recall Strabo being cited, but I'm sure Robert Graves probably did. One of the problems I have is my copy of Graves' mythology, Greek mythology, is from the Folio Society, and these people, when they decided to publish Graves' big magnum opus on Greek mythology, which is an invaluable book, they decided to take out all of Graves' footnotes. You imagine that? And they published Robert. They said, Graves they had some condescending remarks to make about Graves' analytic method, that his, and they took out all his footnotes, and Graves' footnotes are just a magnificent source of material, just like that, and I'm sure he somewhere in there he probably referred to Strabo, but anyway. The one thing I have learned about Melkart was that, and we've discussed this before, that Melkart was the original template for Hercules, and Graves and everybody knows, everybody admits that Melkart was, the Phoenician Melkart, Baal Melkart was the original Hercules. And Tyre, that the one with the two pillars, out front, the one that was used, that was copied for the Temple of Solomon, that temple had a huge diorama or cyclorama of the Circle of the Beasts and Melkart's journey around the zodiac. They had this huge mural, which we have tried to kind of replicate in our cyclorama. The idea being that this was Melkart. Melkart represented the solar hero, and which eventually, of course, became Hercules. But Alexander the Great wanted to visit the temple, and I think Alexander wanted to, I think he wanted to destroy it from the get-go, and he just wanted an excuse. He parked his army across the channel from Tyre, which was an island, and he asked, and he sent a message to the king of Tyre, to Hiram, to let him come over and make a sacrifice, and he wanted to make a sacrifice in the temple to Hercules, Melkart, and they wrote back to him and told him, you can't do that, but what we will do is we will come over across the channel. We'll build an altar on the beach, and you can make your sacrifice there, and we'll help you. And of course, Alexander took that as a terrible insult, and then he had all his troops to turn around and become engineers, and they built a causeway over to Tyre. This was almost like the Roman army, with Masada, where they built that big siege tower to climb up to Masada, and so Alexander built this causeway, and had his troops filling in the causeway, and then he marched over to Tyre, took the town, conquered the temple, and crucified 5,000 devotees of Melkart, priests and lay priests and whatever, crucified them, 5,000 of them, and then destroyed the temple. Now, so we don't know. The Phoenicians were very reluctant to write things down. They were like the Druids. They didn't like to write down their mythological or religious secrets. So we really don't know. And then maybe one of these days we'll dig it up. We'll dig up something like the Nag Hammadi or something, and we will know. But right now we don't know. We don't know just what that Circle of the Beasts was like, and so we're kind of, but we can guess. And so basically we have to use the labors of Hercules that we have. And there are so many, and unfortunately, there are different versions of the labors of Hercules. Now, next week, that's what we're going to do. We're going to get into the labors of Hercules and analyze them, and go around the labors of Hercules. And I might add that Alice Bailey did do a book called The Labors of Hercules. And she did a book in which she tried to interpret the labors of Hercules according to the signs of the zodiac. And you have it. I've looked at it, and I hate to say it, but I'm kind of underwhelmed. I know Alice Bailey. A lot of people really like Alice Bailey, but unfortunately, Alice Bailey credits this Tibetan spirit guide that she has or had. And, of course, this just immediately turns me off because I've had several Tibetan initiations, and I know their astrology has nothing whatsoever to do with Western astrology. You know, the Tibetan astrology is in a universe of its own. It does not relate to our astrology, and so this idea that this Tibetan would know all this stuff is just really is kind of offensive. But and also too, Bailey is sidereal astrology, and so consequently she splits the signs. Have you noticed that when you went through her book?
No, I have noticed that. The other thing that kind of bugs me is this turning Hercules into this Buddhist master, which is kind of the way she portrays him in the beginning of that book.
Yeah. Yeah, well, he's, as I say, the Buddhists, I don't believe that, well, Tibetan astrology is not all that Buddhist, although the Tibetans are, but it's you know there's a lot of Central Asian shamanism and whatever in there in Tibetan astrology. The Bailey book does not really. Well, she may have some good ideas. I'm gonna naturally, before we go into this next week, I'm gonna go through the whole Bailey book and see if I can find anything in there that I do think is good, and we'll discuss it. But the labors of Hercules. Once they are properly associated with the circle of the zodiac, they become a very, very important initiatic system. And because, as you know, we said in the beginning, Hercules was a demigod, of course, and eventually became immortalized in the heavens and after death and whatever. But in modern esoteric terms, the labors of Hercules represent the soul's journey through the wheel of incarnations, and so in this sense, it's very, very important both to know because in order to know where you're going, you have to know where you've been, and in this case, the labors of Hercules become a kind of a map of the progress of the soul. And by the way, I also mentioned that Alice Bailey's disciple, Alan Oken, he took all the labors. He didn't agree with Alice on this. He took all the labors of Hercules and put them into Scorpio, the whole bunch. And so that I don't think that works very well. That's it. I've been doing a lot of talking here. So you want to hold forth on some of this progression, especially as relates to Gilgamesh.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and throw some stuff out there. So you mentioned the pillars in the Temple of Melkart, and that those were in a lot of the places where the Hercules cult was. Any place where there are Phoenicians and they set up the temple, there were the two pillars, and one was gold and the other was emerald, which to me is really an interesting thing to contemplate in this contest, since the gold is usually solar and emerald is associated with earth, also associated with wisdom through Thoth and Hermes. So that I think is something that we might want to touch on.
Yeah, and also those pillars, apparently they were used as kind of a lighthouse, because you could see them. You know, if you came sailing into Tyre at night, you could see them. They had lights on the top of them. Also, too, there are Phoenician pillars. Now, they aren't necessarily the gold and the emerald ones, but there are Phoenician pillars on all these temples of the Carthaginians and the Phoenician colonies in Spain and all through Magna Graecia, the Mediterranean. And they call them silly pillars. And essentially, they're sort of kind of tulip-shaped pillars sitting on top of rectangular pedestals. And these rectangular pedestals had inscriptions on them. And one of these CLLI pillars became kind of the Rosetta Stone of Phoenician. Did you know about this?
I did not know about this. This is very interesting.
Oh yeah, this is fascinating. Nobody really understood the meaning of the Phoenician letters. In fact, I'm wondering if this had something to do with that Phoenician letters book that we talk about, Davies and Zur, the Phoenician letters book. But these pillars were discovered back before World War I in the Mediterranean, somewhere in the Mediterranean. One of these pillars with a base, and it had an inscription. And it was like the Rosetta Stone. It was the Phoenician alphabet and also some other alphabets, I guess Greek, and it gave the meaning of the Phoenician letters, and so that. Which is great. I just wish we had, now that we have the Rosetta Stone of the Phoenician language. Unfortunately, we have very, very little in the Phoenician language. We have to go to Sancho Niato, and that of course is in Greek, and Mochus and what is in Greek. That's all of that is in Greek, but now that we know what the Phoenician language was because of that silly Rosetta Stone kind of thing, it'd be great if we had some of these Phoenician writings, but we don't. Unfortunately, very few have survived. And the ones that have survived are mostly business. Mostly business. Well, the Phoenicians were great business people, that's true. But anyway, next week we'll have an analysis of the labors of Hercules as they have survived, and how each labor relates to the signs of the zodiac. And that'll be our subject next week. And I want you to call in again and on that, and because especially, as I say, you got through that Hellenic astrology course, and so you're actually more right now, more about it than I do, and so call in next week and we'll take on Hercules himself. Okay?
Sounds great.
Yeah, thanks for calling in, and meanwhile, we'll see you next week for the labors of Hercules. We'll pull the dog out of the cave and turn the underworld into the overworld. Okay, until then, good magic, and we'll see you next week.